امروز دنیا به خوبی می‌داند که ملت ایران مسیر زندگی در تعامل با جهان به دور از خشونت و افراطیگری را برگزیده است. ملت ما می‌خواهد در صلح و دوستی با جهان زندگی کند، ولی در این حال هم حاضر نیست تحقیر یا تهدیدی را بپذیرد.
There's rising hope from many that Iran is entering a new era of openness. Just weeks ago, the nation re-elected President Hassan Rouhani. It was a victory that many have said was a choice to continue a path of global engagement. Iran's flirtation with reform is nothing new, and the country has attempted to engage with the West during previous administrations. But that engagement was halted during the 2 terms of former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. In 2009, protests briefly swept the nation after allegations of government fraud. The Green Movement that sprung out of that discontent was swiftly crushed, sending reform-minded Iranians to the margins. But have these voices gained new momentum with Rouhani's re-election? Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Reza Pahlavi, the son of the late Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. He's the founder of the National Council of Iran. So thank you very much for joining us. Is Iran on the path to reform after that latest election? It was good news, wasn't it?
I don't think that this regime, because of its nature, has the capacity to ever reform. You are dealing with a system with a constitution that doesn't allow for people to actually legislate their own affairs. There's no way that an unelected body of officials who have the final say would allow for what in any real democracy allows for modification and amendments to even the constitution. As such, I don't see in what way we could plausibly assume that by these means people have recourse to implement true and real reforms, which is why it has failed all these years. And this is pretty much just a once every 4-year theater that the regime puts out there to try to pretend like there is a democratic process to the outside world. Whereas the people themselves know very well that most of these so-called candidates are pre-screened and pre-approved, and their loyalty has to be a system that will be unwavering when it comes to what people really want. And therefore, they have to play along and play the game just for survival purposes. And it has always been the choice between the lesser of the evils when it comes to the final candidates.
But hold on, if you stayed home, nobody's going to send you to a gulag or a death camp. Why did 73% of eligible voters still decide to go and not only go to the polls, but they decided to vote for the most moderate candidate available? So understandably, sure, it might not be a proper democracy, right? And again, my question is it heading in the right direction? So looking at the numbers, 40 million voted, 73% turnout, Rouhani getting 24 million of those votes. It sent a message that they want to change their country incrementally through this process, not through overturning the whole system. It's clear, isn't it?
Well, there are like 3 groups of people in general. First of all, let's not forget those who did not vote and did not want to legitimize the regime in that process. Then you have a group of people who are coerced into voting because if they don't get a stamp in their national identity card, they cannot continue their studies if they are students, they cannot work in a government office if they are governmental employees, and so on and so forth. And yes, you have the 3rd category who are forced to choose between what would be the least negative for them and almost a rejection of the system, like some kind of a referendum, who are those who voted for Rouhani, not because they are enamored with him, but because they certainly did not want Raisi to be in his place. And at the end, they are ultimately saying the same thing we want, but absent a clear alternative, they have no choice but to play along this game. None of this indicates that people actually believe in the system or want to participate in it, but strictly have no choice for the time being. The ultimate solution that everybody seeks is to put an end to this regime altogether. And of course, this task is very difficult when you are dealing with an extremely repressive regime with no international support whatsoever.
Do you want to return to Iran in a leadership role?
My role today is uniquely to be focused on the liberation of my homeland. I believe as a secular Democrat that the only way that Iranians, all citizens of Iran, regardless of their ethnicity, religious beliefs, or political orientation, have absolute right to equality under the law. First and foremost, women with men, which is non-existent under this clerical dictatorship. only a secular democracy will allow the Iranian people to achieve that. And it is under the current circumstances that we cannot attain what is the rightful expectation of our citizens in their various sectarian distributions, from workers to students to ethnic groups and what have you. Therefore, the guarantee of human rights for our country and liberty and equality under the law for all citizens can only be achieved when we are past this regime. And our task is to ultimately address the world by saying, as long as this regime is in place, the Iranian people will suffer and the world will not see an end to instability for a regime that depends for its survival on constantly fomenting instability and conflict in the region.
They call themselves democratic, but they also believe in Vilayat Faqih. They have the supreme leader, they have the Guardian Council that chooses the candidates and so on, that vets the candidates. That's why you believe fundamentally that they are illegitimate or non-democratic. Can you also be a secular democrat, but at the same time be the crown prince of the Pahlavi dynasty? The two don't seem to square, do they?
Are you talking about models of government? I think we've seen both in the world today. We have parliamentary monarchies as we have parliamentary republics. The final form is to be decided by the people of Iran in their majority. The content, however, is critical, and I emphasize the word secular in the sense that it is impossible to achieve democracy without having a clear separation of religion from government. This is a proven fact the world over.
And they are parliamentary monarchies, right? But according to the Iranian people's understanding and experience of monarchy under the Pahlavi dynasty, and this is a title you still carry, I'm not making this up, you're still the crown prince of the Pahlavi dynasty. Their experience of it is not democratic at all. So why should they go back to the past, go back to something they experienced before 1979, which is what they rose up against to overthrow? How can you be a part of the solution if you still carry that name?
Well, first of all, today's generation of Iranians, by mere comparison of where Iran was headed in terms of liberalization, in terms of modernization, in terms of progress, in terms of economic development, know very well that had it not been for this revolution, we should have been South Korea today, if not Japan. Instead, we are North Korea. Why? What was the path that Iran was taking? We were moving forward. Things were not perfect, granted.
That's what the government says right now. They're saying we have an election, things are not perfect, we're moving in the right direction. It's the same argument.
Well, there's a very big difference between the way Iranians of all walks of life are limited in practically every aspect of freedom that existed. The only criticism back then, if you want to look back at the past, was there was criticism in terms of the political arena not being fully open, which it wasn't, and I grant that. But we are thinking ahead. We are moving forward. We are drawing lessons from history. We know where we need to be as a nation. And I think today's generation has certainly not forgotten all the positive aspects of what had happened before. In comparison to this regime, it's the difference between night and day. Okay. Having said that, it has to be a democratic process that determines it, and that's the basis of tomorrow's self-determination and sovereignty of our nation, which is not achieved under the current regime.
And I don't doubt your sincerity in wanting to bring democracy to Iran. I'm not questioning that, right? Not at all. But again, in 1979, it wasn't just those who would be considered, say, Islamists under Khomeini, who rose up against the Shah. It ended up that they came to power, right? But you had leftists, you had all sorts of people rising up against the Shah, against your father. It wasn't only those who ended up with the power in their hands. And again, I ask you, why should people listen to Reza Pahlavi, who's the crown prince of the Pahlavi dynasty, calling for democracy in Iran, when for those who rose up against the system, it was a system that might have been secular, but it was also a system which had the Savak torturing people, tens of thousands of people in prison, a system that they felt was way too severe for them, and they wanted to rise up against it and overthrow it. Why should they listen to the Shah's son?
Well, first of all, the narratives are different, and ultimately the truth will be based on the real statistics as opposed to a lot of exaggeration that were made about many numbers, but I'm not going to get into that because it's besides that point. We are now talking about 2017, literally 40 years, 4 decades later, and where are we at now is what people ask. And just because I carry a name does not necessarily mean that I have genetically inherited the predicament or circumstances of my predecessors. I am my own man, I have my own vision, and I think it is on that basis that I've established a rapport with my fellow compatriots with whom I'm with daily contact. And if I could only show you the kind of comments, the kind of questions, the kind of statements, the kind of support that they show me, and the majority of them were people that are not even born at the time of the revolution. It's a very young country, still having a lot of aspirations. And me as a member of what I would call a burnt generation, and there are many in my age group that will tell you that we are sort of a bridge between what was and the future, have a specific duty in our hands, because while we want to retain the best that was and eliminate the bad part of it, we want to move forward and be able to help the future generation achieve what has always been a long-standing hope and dream for our country that started more than a century ago in Iran with the constitutional revolution. And we had our ebbs and flows, but I think we are stronger for it as a nation. The taboo of religion was a subject that we needed to deal with, and to this day, in most of the Islamic world, the subject of Islam is a taboo subject. In Iran, it is no longer. This by itself is a huge achievement, which will facilitate the process of secularization in my country, I believe. In a world of social media, when you're limited in terms of, we are not limited in terms of information and communications both ways.
Have you ever considered foregoing your title in order to improve your democratic credentials?
I don't know why you want to imply that this institution has an undemocratic connotation. Today, one of the most progressive liberal systems in the world happen to be constitutional monarchies. Look at Europe, for example.
I'm basing it on the Pehlevi dynasty, not on other monarchies.
Wait, well, reason more. In fact, I think that today the value that people have for the services that my grandfather and my father did for Iran is unprecedented in terms of the peak of their popularity. I think my father today, or my grandfather for that matter, are probably 10 times more popular now than they were at the height of whatever popularity they might have had in their own time. This is the way people are thinking today.
But even
don't listen to me, go ask the Iranian people.
Okay, so even Mir Hossein Mousavi and others who were leading the Green Movement, not a single one of them questioned the legitimacy of the revolution that overthrew your father's government, right? Not a single one of them said, hey, we shouldn't have overthrown that government.
Sir, listen to me.
Yes.
Listen to me. Mr. Khomeini, the leader of such revolution, at the time of the revolution, was telling the Iranian people, just because our parents made a decision doesn't mean that we have to follow it.
Do you support President Trump's approach at trying to isolate Iran and get the Saudis and a bunch of other countries together to isolate the Iranians?
Look, I don't think that the formula has been successful when you are either on the one hand flirting with the regime, hoping for them to change their behavior, or trying to isolate it and contain it. Neither of these formulas has proven to be effective ever since Ronald Reagan. So it doesn't matter whether it's a Republican in the White House or a Democrat. So long as the foreign policy, and by the way, not just the United States, I'm talking about the rest of the countries that are US allies in Europe and the region, want to beat around the bush and expect that the regime itself would change its behavior, it's a lost cause. The only thing that is of common interest, I believe, in the best interest of the Iranian people on the one hand, in the interest of many countries in the areas who have correctly identified the chief reason for these problems to be directly tied to the regime in Iran and its comportment, and ultimately the rest of the world, is the fact that as long as this regime is in place, we will have a problem. So you cannot negotiate with them. You cannot expect them to change their behavior. Containment is not the solution. And it brings us to a point that a regime change is necessary at the hand of the Iranian people, who have been a non-factor in the eyes of the foreign governments in all these years. The dialogue with Iran has been limited only to the regime and its representative, never with the people and secular democratic forces that in their majority reject this system without question. The time has come to look at this seriously before we have more problems. The continuation of the regime, means of its proxy war in the region, is creating problems for your country. You have refugees coming from Syria. All of this as a result of Iran involvement in the region, and many other problems that continue to exist. The regime is a problem not just for its own people, but the whole region. So whatever the viewpoint today is in Washington or in London or in Paris or in Riyadh or in Jerusalem, the fact is that there's an opportunity for real change, a change that will put an end to proliferation, to radical terrorism, Islamist forces, like whether it's ISIS or what the regime is doing from Iran, for the benefit of the self-determination of a country that has the biggest impact in the region, but a country that will have a responsible government, committed to regional stability, cordial relationship with its neighbors, and will be out of this nightmare that has drained all of us in the region for the past 4 decades.
Okay, Reza Pahlavi, I hope you'll come on the Newsmakers again, because it's been really excellent talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us.